Hey everyone, welcome to the Office Hours with Cloud Posse, your weekly dose of insider DevOps with about AWS, Terraform. We cover trends, sweet news, all sourced from our sweetops community, plus a live Q&A that you can't find anywhere else. It's September 13th, 2023, and I'm your host, Eric Osterman. Real quick, I'm the founder and CEO of Cloud Posse. We're a DevOps accelerator for startups that helps teams who are overwhelmed with AWS. We do this by using our library of 200 Terraform modules that have been battle tested and downloaded over 10 million times. No matter where you find yourself on this journey, we're here to help your startup build a reliable, modern, scalable infrastructure, transform ClickOps into a well-oiled DevOps machine, and leverage our open source, rock-solid Terraform blueprints. The result? You launch better products faster, free up your bandwidth for innovation, and nail your value delivery every time. And if you or your team has been banging your head against the wall with underperforming infrastructure, just head over to cloudposse.com/quiz, answer a few quick questions, and we'll chart out a roadmap for success, free. Worst case, you get a clear roadmap for shoring up your infrastructure. Best case, we co-build it with you and empower your DevOps team in 90 days or less. So how do you maximize today's session? First off, our format's informal. Engage as much as you'd like, ask questions, and if you're curious about any of our open source tools or modules, go for it. For those on the recording, we host these calls live, so don't miss out. Join us by going to cloudposse.com/officehours. Again, cloudposse.com/officehours. Now, I do have one ask. If you find any portion of today's office hours valuable, share it with your team. Just head over to youtube.com/cloudposse or send us a short testimonial about the value you're getting in Slack. Just go to slack.cloudposse.com. Remember, we're not simply just creating content here, we're building a community. Now, let's get started with the news, and here's what caught my attention this week. First, sad, we announced previously, Squarespace acquired or Google spun off their domains division. Well, that has now completed to the extent that any new registrations, you have to create a new account and go over to Squarespace. If you have domains currently registered on Google Domains, you can still continue to manage them on there, but that will be eventually migrated over. Just another reminder, I bring it up more like, not that it probably affects too many people using OpsWorks for Chef, but it's just kind of like the end of an era coming to a close as different little platforms supporting Chef are winding down. Well, OpsWorks end of life for Chef is May 5th. Amazon doesn't shut down many things, so this has got to be backed by a lot of data. Or is there a license change precluding them from managing Chef anymore? I'm curious. This was an interesting article I found. I think on the one hand, I hate these things. Like, this is why we can't have good things. This is why we can't have nice things, right? It is a general best practice to strictly pin your GitHub actions, using like a commit SHA for that action. But GitHub actions are so flexible, so malleable, that doesn't really buy many assurances. Because you could just be pinning, for example, to a composite GitHub action, and the composite GitHub action is just calling other actions that are not pinned strictly to anything. So just strictly pinning your actions is, you got to have additional checks and balances in place to make sure you don't introduce supply chain attacks.
If everyone followed that advice, then that would be useful.
Exactly. Yeah. If it was recursive. Yeah.
Isn't that true for anything? If I pin the version of left pad, but left pad uses whatever.
Yep. Supply chain attacks all the way down the supply chain.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah. So, exactly. And even the, like, for example, some of the more advanced GitHub actions that themselves are using npm modules or Python libraries or whatnot, and those aren't strictly pinning. It's there's no good answer other than take a snapshot of the entire dependency chain, and there's no practical conceivable way of doing that either without also regenerating or modifying the code inline. So that was that. Just a small announcement. So
it's funny. Jeremy just posted what I was actually going to say, is that if we could write all of our CICD pipelines using Nix, then it solves the problem, because that's exactly what Nix does. It creates like an entire dependency tree snapshotted at a particular point in time all the way down, and you can always get back to that exact version running the exact things that you want.
That's a good point. Now we just need Nix CI. Nixie. Interesting. This was just a small one. I'm happy to see some more US government investments open sourced, or at least publicly available on GitHub. Here's a roadmap to some of those projects that you can explore. Soon to be end of life or announced abandoned, as all these things are. I don't think this is a new announcement. We might have even brought it up before.
Could you go back to the GSA code one real quick? Let's just call some out real quick, real fast. Just recognize the age of what these have up here. So it's not very well maintained, it looks like. Yeah.
Good point. Good point.
That's actually fast moving in government land.
Yeah. That doesn't necessarily mean we should use it in the private sector, though, unfortunately.
I'll throw out a quick shout out. If folks aren't aware, it's called codeforamerica.org. They do a very similar open source / collaborative software for community-based kind of it's just reaching out, getting volunteer developers to help build software and work on projects for the betterment of all. So really cool. I've worked with them in the past.
Any success stories off the top of your head?
Yeah, I worked with the state of California with their citizenship and immigration, and we helped build a full stack application because as we were kind of doing community outreach to identify, how can we help green card holders or non-permanent residents, become a citizen. The biggest kind of barrier to entry was just lack of knowledge and language. And so when we built this full stack app in collaboration with them, we were able to, exponentially increase, that success rate. So yeah, they gave us, quite a fat grant. And so we're working with them on other things too, but that was like a pretty big one, a pretty big win. So, yeah, there's open source, not just in FOSS, but obviously a lot of smaller, not even just government like state, but even local, like open source San Jose.org is the main brigade I'm a part of. And yeah, sometimes we just focus on more county or city-based initiatives.
Just for my sake, can you maybe explain it? Is there an actual government sponsorship of this, or is it entirely an independent nonprofit organization?
It is an independent nonprofit. Yeah. Just to be clear, sorry. But yeah, Code.gov, I guess, is an official repo for, I guess, government sites.
Yeah. Cool. The next announcement, I don't think it's also anything new. also kind of old. It was just surfacing or circulating again in my LinkedIn feed. I think a lot of these are pretty, I say, shallow in their depth. Well-intentioned, but shallow. What else? Oh, this one here struck a chord with me, or anyone else in the community, building open source products, trying to monetize them, and some of the challenges that you have when you build products for developers, and some of the sales techniques that work in a lot of ways, but maybe don't work that well with developers because developers are allergic to high pressure sales or anything like that. And one of the kind of funny observations that they had at Earthly. So they basically had launched a CI, managed CI product based on Earthly. Earthly is a fresh take on how to do builds in a very fast and efficient manner. That's cross-platform. It also works. You can just embed Earthly pipe like actions in any system that you use, whether it's Jenkins, GitLab, GitHub Actions, etc. And then they had a standalone product, Earthly CI, and in the spirit of like a lean startup, launching something early, getting validation and feedback. Well, they weren't able to make it work. But one of the funny little anecdotes from their story is the biggest negative indicator of a potential customer was they went through their funnel and requested a demo, meaning that they didn't actually find the product, kick the tires, try and use it on their own before reaching out. And I find some empathy with that in what we do at Cloud Posse, selling a technical product. All right. Anyone else had any reactions to this?
I think it's actually a smart play overall. Like, we already have too many CI platforms.
Yeah.
But focusing on tooling that can run on any CI platform actually sounds like a much better plan to me, and makes them more laser focused on what the core mission is without having to deal with the very hard job of running a platform that can run any arbitrary workload to build and deploy things, which there are very large companies that are already struggling at doing that right now. So
GitHub Actions.
There's, I mean, every one of them, right? I mean, GitHub, Circle CI, Semaphore,
GitHub is crashing like
GitLab.
weekly, it feels like.
Yeah.
The scale they're operating at.
Yeah, it's a hard problem.
I also think it's really smart because it is a big lift to ask a company to move like a decade of codified pipelines and things in Jenkins to a whole new platform founded by a startup that might just shut down or sunset it, which actually ended up happening in this case. So yeah, just focusing on better build tooling for that sounds cool. So the other thing that they are keeping are satellites, which is, I believe, hosted runners for running some of these things that they do.
Yeah, it's basically like how they do parallelism. Like, you basically start up an agent, which would presumably run on some other CI platform in this case, or locally if you're doing local testing and development, and then like you send jobs to all of those things, and then they can coordinate their job running and report back to the main caller.
Yeah. Is anybody using Earthly? I'd love to hear a firsthand account.
I've been messing with it just locally with a few different builds. It's kind of nice. But I really have to kick the tires on something for a while now for me to really see whether or not it passes all of my scruples. Because honestly, I have a lot of tools that I use. So for me, it's like, here's another on the shelf.
Funny thing in the chat here, Matt Gallias post. So the founder of Earthly is actually Vlad Lanoscu, but not the Vlad Lanoscu that's a regular of our office hours. Two totally different Vlads with the same name.
With the exact same name.
Yeah, and even a
That
lower
is
second, like even spelling their last name in lowercase. Maybe that's a language thing. I don't know. But I thought that was a funny
Oh,
coincidence.
and a very funny, without making commentary on the political thing of it, I ran into a guy the other day whose name is actually Alex Jones. And he said that how hard it is for him when he calls different places and tries to make reservations and things because people think that he's like the Alex Jones,
right?
That's in the news everywhere. And he said that he's considered actually giving himself a different name because of how much of a pain in the ass it is. So it's funny when people have the same names.
Yeah,
we need globally unique names from now on. Everyone has to be named a UID.
For what it's
Love
worth,
it.
I friended myself on Facebook, other Eric Ostermans, because I just thought it was a fun idea to be friends with myself. Interesting to see somebody else growing up with the same kind of.
Yeah, I'm interested in a few of my coworkers have talked about Earthly, and I've just very superficially looked at it. I'm interested as well in just kind of hearing people's experience with it.
If you already organize several Docker images that you try to use for base builds, it's really handy. You find yourself making a tool belt or a toolbox pretty quickly with it. So I like that about it. I don't want to just say it's all sunshine and rainbows, because obviously with that I've made lots of really lousy tools. So I don't know yet if that's just me or the tool. I think it's me. So there's a little bit of a knack in how to write Docker containers with it that compose well. But yeah, like I
Yeah,
said,
I
I'll
mean,
be cautiously supportive.
I've always been super happy with, just wrapping I'll have a make file that has a target called test, and inside that target it'll run Docker run whatever, and run the test, and that'll run anywhere. My entire GitHub Actions pipeline is, jobs, whatever, step, run, make test.
I haven't tested it out, but I'm curious to test it out along with also, I think Dagger is the one that people often most compare it to.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm in the GitLab land, and the one annoying thing about GitLab and pipelines is you kind of have to push your code for it to fail.
It's dagger.io, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've used Dagger as well. I think that I love QLang for some of the type safety stuff that it does. But that's another tool that I haven't had the time to really vet. I need more weekends.
Is there any caching mechanism? How have you found that experience? Because that's something that I'm always finding myself having problems with, slow builds or ephemeral runners.
So that's something that Earthly does really well based on their docs, but I haven't used it, so I can't attest to
It
that.
does. It does a pretty good job of caching. That's also where, again, I have to admit that I'm still getting skills on how to do it right. And I have folks who recommend me stuff all the time. Let's see if I can even get one of these up. But not to derail the conversation.
You mean you have like a little local demo?
Not from me, but one of the folks who was working there, fortunately he got laid off with the sunsetting of the Earthly CI.
Oh,
So we would pair and he would show me cool stuff with Earthly. So that's where I was like, I think I have one of his code examples that was like really neat.
yeah. If you have that and you're able to, be cool.
I have to make sure that his license is and that it's actually public because I think it might be
Oh,
private.
okay.
I think
Yeah,
I might have
everyone's-
screwed up on that. I might have just screwed up on that. I think it might be private stuff.
Okay. Yeah. Well,
This
just
is this
raise
It's
your
my
hand.
fault.
Raise your hand if there's something. But yeah.
this whole situation kind of is a good segue into the larger conversation of, you know, when is it quote unquote right to stick with the mainstream, you know, GitHub Actions, GitLab CI, Jenkins is probably the top three, versus go with some, like as an example, you know, for any type of tool, versus go with, you know, something that's, you know, much smaller, but not something that's super widespread, you know. And maybe the place where I'm coming from with that kind of question is like, as it pertains to like my resume, you know, if I dive into this niche tool that nobody else uses, you know, is that good for my career, or, you know, is it better for my career to stick with GitLab CI or whatever?
I can throw another thing out there. I don't see that most tools work well. I do think that most of the folks I talk to about Nix, they use Nix secretly, as do I, and it tends to be something that accelerates your flow enough, and you can always use it right next to other tools like Docker. It plays well with a lot of other tools rather than going against them.
But can you tie that back to Andrew's question about like, should he,
Should
focus
you
on
do it?
mainstream CI systems, or, niche, or does it matter or whatnot? Is there a right or wrong answer?
Yeah, I mean, my own experience has been it's good to think outside the box. I find that all the different tools I've used have given me different perspectives on how to solve the same problem 100 ways.
Yeah.
So I like that about it, but I do think that there's always a limit. I honestly only seriously just at home, I only try to use 2 at most tool chains. Just my opinion.
I've been trying to do a lot of innovation at my current role, and so my one advice would be, when it comes to the professional workplace, it's very much less about like you and very much more about the team. So sometimes you are going to just have to take that more inefficient path to enable other developers to also contribute and engage in CI/CD pipelines, as well as when you're, eventually departure, it's going to continue to be sustainable for folks that take over your work. With that in mind, I also do like kind of, in my home lab, test out these different and newer tools. And sometimes what I find is there's a kind of a neat idea, whether it's like, volume mounting for caching, for example, and like, how can I bring that into like my professional, the professional workplace CICD, but in a more packaged and digestible manner. So, but it's so like with most answers, it depends.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily focusing on just my resume, but it's the resume of the, all the resumes of all the people on my team too. When we're architecting a solution, I think this is something that one of my coworkers who does a lot of blogging and whatever, said one time. He used to work at Walmart, and so big, giant, huge production pipelines that touched tens of thousands of people. He basically said that the kind of things we do, when it comes to operations and DevOps and stuff, things should be boring. Like, you don't want things to be exciting, because exciting means, things are down and things are on fire, and like, you want things to be kind of boring, and which is kind of antithesis to, let's use all the latest and greatest, tools and stuff, compared to let's use what's boring, what's reliable.
I'll piggyback on that and say that that's like there's probably 5 blog posts out there that are about using Postgres instead of using the 50 other niche database options that you could go and use for search or whatever. And I actually, we just went through a long investigation for our client to basically write up a document that says, yeah, we should not use Elasticsearch, we should use Postgres because it's better for our use case and a lot less maintenance overhead. So yeah, the picking boring technology as just a general trend to follow or a thing to do is not always glamorous, but it is good. I think, to your original question about when to go outside of that, my own thoughts are maybe if your technology is unique or it has something that's specific, going back to CICD, I think I thought of a good example. Like there's a company called Pradvana, and they do CICD for single tenant and multi-tenant infrastructure, which multi-tenant infrastructure is a big pain. And I've never seen their product, but maybe if you were on a multi-tenant infrastructure, then maybe it makes sense to at least evaluate them. But I think for the most part, sticking with the standard tools makes a lot of sense. And there's another place to break out of that, which is, hey, when you can use an open source community, then leverage that, then there's a big reason to shift and kind of make a move. And I think that's what we've seen with GitHub Actions, is that it is a big force multiplier to use GitHub Actions because you're able to pull actions from an ecosystem, and that is huge in terms of like building, the same CI/CD that we've all built for every company we've worked for. Anyway, I
gotta head off, but I don't want to take up any more time, but I'll make a note of this is, when, Andrew, when you're saying like, keep it vanilla, keep it boring, keep it simple, keep it stable. At the end of the day, it's all about perspective, right? If the interface that the developers interact with the CI/CD pipeline doesn't change, but the experience after they click that button or they push that commit stays the same or improves, then that's fine, right? So get to a state where it is stable and it is boring, and then that means you have time to do that innovation behind the curtain, and then roll out, those iterative changes to your CI/CD, and then the interface from the developer point of view doesn't change. You build that tooling to interview. That's why there's developer tooling, developer automation, and experience teams to kind of bridge that gap to ensure that they're in their world and they live on top of the platform engineering that you bring out. One really cool thing that came out really recently, I'll put in the chat. GitHub Actions runners, self-hosted on Kubernetes, is really, really cool. 2 weeks ago, they came out with another Helm chart. So before there was the Actions runner controller, which is where you have long-lived runners. In that same Helm chart, I put in the chat. And then more recently, I think about a year now, they started rolling out scale set, and they had the scale set controller. And then now they have a new, and so that's just a controller, right? And so now they have a Helm chart for provisioning the scale set, which is essentially like, Ubuntu latest or Ubuntu 4 core. I've been trying it out this past week, and it's been very reliable and quick. So highly recommend it. Really, really, really cool. I would recommend, I had to build my own Docker image, but I just based it off of the GHCR you see there on 169. So I could build in my BuildX plugins and Compose plugins and Helm CLI and AWS, but because it doesn't come with like wget and curl. But after getting that out of the way, it's been very stable and very good for us, and cheap and fast. So really cool. Thanks everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks. Have a good day. Scale. So
Yeah, the only thing I'd like to kind of quickly through, because I want to play devil's advocate on what most people are saying here, is that keep it boring, keep it usual conversation. Is that if everybody did that, innovation would never happen. And I'm not saying that you want to roll new stuff out into production the day it comes out, but for instance, an example of what I'm talking about is that when Golang came out, it was funny because it came out and it was like the whole world adopted it really quickly. But it was very new. Obviously, it was something that Google had been playing with for a period of time prior to releasing it to open source. But my point is that if nobody ever uses anything new, experiments, tests, it does the usual rollout of the newer stuff that can come out and that can make our lives easier, innovation will never happen, and we'd still be rolling on in production things that are 20 years old and never updated. So while I agree to some extent that we want to use judicious planning and testing for old stuff, there's nothing wrong with using new stuff, but as long as you do your due diligence and making sure that it works correctly for your use case. And I would also apply that it depends. So I don't think it's a good idea to be very prescriptive about you got to do it this way. It does depend on your environment, your teams, your knowledge. I don't necessarily kind of pivot for a second. I don't necessarily agree with doing creating everything based on the premise that your teams or that your future replacement is going to have to know how to work with it. The problem with that is that you don't know who your future replacement is, and if you don't innovate because you're thinking that your future replacement's not going to be able to work with it in the future, well, then that person probably ought not to be the future replacement. We all have to learn new things. We all have knowledge that we end up not that we know now, but tomorrow we're going to learn something new. I don't think that you should hold yourself back from getting a good product out the door because you think that your future replacement can't manage it. And that's it.
Yeah.
I think the one comment I'll add and then shut up is Golang did a really good job because Golang's boring now.
Yeah.
Like
Rust is the new hotness.
it's further to the right on that scale of adoption. And I guess my argument is, in our particular field, platform engineering, operations, DevOps, whatever you want to call it, it feels smarter to be over more towards the right of the adoption curve than all the way on the left. When it comes to, maybe app development, that's when you're able to go shift further over to the left.
I think it depends on, and this is really like the advice for a lot of things. It depends on what your business does and how it innovates and how it makes money. Like if you are like an e-commerce company, I completely agree with you, right? Like, you want the most stable platform that can deliver your app, 24/7 to do whatever it needs to do to sell product, through that pipeline. But if you are a company whose business is like the platform or part of the platform or doing something to deliver a platform, like you need to be way more on the side of the left to that to be able to deliver innovation and scale and new features and those types of things to your customers. So I think you have to look at the perspective of what your business actually is. Yeah.
I love it. Because the other thing this friend of mine says is, we aren't software engineers, their primary job responsibility is not to write code. It's to deliver outcomes, and deliver business outcomes. And what you just said goes right into that.
So for those
100%.
So for folks who are interested in this conversation and want to dive deeper, I would like to recommend Wordly mapping as an interesting framework that might be useful to it's Wordly mapping. Yeah, that's the one. Learn Wordly mapping. Essentially, it's an exercise that permits you to take your value chain and overlay it on a maturity model that gives you a sense of where you should invest in developing along that value chain. It's kind of parallel to the conversation that's been happening here. It can be a little bit verbose, but it seems like there's not this Worley mapping in 96. It seems like there's been a lot of development in trying to make it more user friendly. So it might be useful. I'd say just give it a look. Give yourself like 30 minutes to take a look at it, and if it sticks with you, then it's great. If not, then forget what I said.
Yeah, I think drawing, and I'll say this, and then I will be quiet and let Eric move on to the next topic. But the drawing the parallel, like very, very close into this group here, like what we do at Cloud Posse, in investment in tools and reusable workflows and building those types of things, and like all sorts of crazy automations and stuff we spend tons of time on, is because we're delivering like reusable products to end users. Like probably isn't the same kind of stuff that you as a consumer like of that product and delivering a different business to a different set of customers should be interested in trying to fix and improve. And I think that you have that kind of all along the value chain. Like, we're like, and we at Cloud Posse are not like spending tons of time like tuning kernel parameters to get the highest IO throughputs we can so that like our Terraform code builds faster or something like that. But people who are building streaming platform appliances that they're putting at the edge for Netflix certainly are interested in looking at those types of things as problems to solve. So like solving core problems that are aligned with your business proposition is probably the best advice you can look at for all of this stuff, and figure out whatever isn't your core value proposition and figure out a different solution that can solve that for you from someone who does that as their value, as their core business. I think that's kind of the easy way to look at it, from figure out what to work on, what not to work on.
Yeah. All right, let's just move on to one last announcement. Then Q&A. Matt Gowie, you had posted a question a couple weeks ago. I don't think you were on last week, so wanted to get to that one today. Last one was just Google announces some infrastructure provisioner working with Terraform. Just some of the irony in this was in the same document. It says it's designed to work with Terraform, which is an open source tool. So not sure if they're referring to OpenTF or earlier versions of Terraform there.
They actually point to like the getting started from HashiCorp Terraform. So I'm assuming they mean that.
I know, that's me being snarky.
Oh yeah. So one quick announcement that I noticed, not that I noticed, but like that I know came out yesterday, was that in advancing the OpenTF agenda, they've been talking about building a registry to combat Terraform's registry syntax, our registry licensing things. And yesterday they announced that Fastly offered to donate the hosting and bandwidth at the edge to host a central Terraform registry for OpenTF, which I thought was a pretty interesting announcement.
Yeah, very cool announcement of them stepping up for that. I mean, fortunately, the bandwidth requirement is relatively minimal, but having a distributed registry backed by the CDN would be great.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that's a great solution.
I believe there's, I don't know if it's been published yet. I believe the registry that they're working on will be published at some point. All the official providers have to be recompiled because you're not allowed to redistribute the binaries from HashiCorp. So that's why you see all of these here.
I was just going to ask that. That scared me. But I guess they can just keep the fork up to date from the upstream and then rebuild. and that's what they're
Yeah.
planning on doing. So that's totally legit.
And who knows? I mean, what I'm hoping is ultimately this is successful enough that it's a feudal thing, and HashiCorp just says, you can use these providers. That's fine.
Yeah, we hope. It seems like they're trying to create the roadblocks though that make it so that that's not the case. The registry move is yeah. Anyway,
that was
I actually, one of the things that I thought was interesting is that I just happened to notice this, I think yesterday or the day before when I was plugging around, is that the OpenTF manifesto repo has almost the same number of stars as HashiCorp Terraform.
Yeah, it almost reached that in less than 2 weeks or something.
Yeah,
it's pretty phenomenal. And the new
which
one
seems pretty crazy.
So
yeah, the actual
Terraform has 38,000 stars, I believe.
Yeah, exactly. And the actual like OpenTF repo already has close to 6,000 stars, I think. Yeah.
So I think it's off to a good start. And things are forthcoming with a very large, foundation, Linux Foundation. I don't think it's secret anymore. So there'll be a public announcement on that coming up soon. All right. Let's see. Matt Gowie.
Hey,
So you'd ask something here. What are folks using for internal dev documentation wikis? You have a client, their docs are split across many areas, and you're looking to help them with this. You started to research GitHub's wiki, but realized that there's nowhere near as full featured as you'd like it to. What free and open source tools are there?
Yeah, and I forgot I posted this, but I would love to still hear folks' thoughts. I know you folks use Docusaurus. I would love to hear the thoughts behind using Docusaurus and hosting it your own. I think that there's two. This is internal documentation, right? Like this is documentation we want behind authentication. So that's a piece that I think is like worth mentioning. For you, maybe hosting it and having it be open documentation, then it makes a lot of sense to use something that's just completely open. And yeah, you need to run this site, but maybe Netlify is running that for you and it's super cheap. What I think we're moving towards after like looking at a few options, and I definitely haven't heard of all the options, so I'd love to know what others use still. But we were looking at Gitbook and some of the alternatives there, and their pricing is just kind of crazy. Like it's paid per user, and it's not cheap for self-hosted internal documentation. And then the one that I found that looked really full featured, pricing looks solid, supports GitHub SSO, was Read the Docs, which of course has been really used heavily in the Python community. I've seen it a ton. I think I actually used to work in the same office as them back, over a decade ago. And yeah, I think we're going to move in that direction. But if anybody has any better suggestions, then we'd love to hear it.
The only thing I would suggest, okay, so some background on me is I've been doing this now for about 25 years. And documentation by far is the biggest problem that I've seen across the board my entire 25 years in this profession. The only thing that I would call out to be careful of is that typically with technology, you could say, find what works best now. And, if we get to a point where we don't like this, we can always shift to something else. It's kind of a pain to shift, but we can move into something else. Documentation is going to be the one thing where that might be really complicated. So you're going to want to try to make the best choice you can right now. And unfortunately, something that is not expensive, in my estimation, is going to be really hard to find. And by that, I mean that's not expensive and meets all your needs, especially when you're probably going to want to have a lifetime of at least 5 years or more using whatever tool you decide to use. We use Jira. The problem with Jira is that it is very expensive and it's useful. It's got its little bugs and crap here and there, and the features that it provides, in my personal opinion, are really no better than something that you could get with, say, GitHub markup and using GitHub markup. And if this was my company, as a software developer and an SRE, personally, I would just stick with GitHub documentation and wiki. But everyone has different needs. What I'm looking to find eventually here in the future, and if you can find something that can do this, I'm not a huge fan or proponent of the GPT stuff, but one of the places where I see GPT that could really shine is maintaining your documentation for you, depending upon where it can gather information and train itself about what your software is. Because one of the biggest problems with documentation is keeping it alive. It's a pain in the butt. So I don't have a good answer for you, unfortunately, because this is a perpetual problem that personally I've never found a really solid solution to. But those are a couple of thoughts that I could put on the table for you.
I think there's two use cases here, and I'm confused as to which one I think you're looking for. One is a static documentation website. The other is a wiki. So like static documentation website is when you would use Docusaurus, read the docs, whatever. A wiki is you would use GitHub Wiki or Confluence or, you know, whatever. But they're like static documentation website, you're putting in a PR to update documentation for a tool or whatever. You know, something like Confluence or GitHub Wiki or whatever, like those are living documents that update way more frequently, that, you know, multiple people might go in and update it once.
Yeah, so what we're doing, what we need, like, we needed an aggregate documentation hub that is a wiki more than it is. And I mean, the thing is that those wikis can be a static site because, hey, if it's just on auto deploy when something gets updated, that's what we're planning on doing. But we need the internal documentation hub that's GitHub SSO authentication, because, hey, it is a client. We're not in their, you know, SSO directory. So we are all, both my team, their team, and, you know, stakeholders are all in GitHub. And that provides us like an easy means by which to say, hey, we, you know, have our authentication for these internal documentation, which is like Wikidocs, like, hey, how do you use AWS locally? How do you, you know, use the AWS CLI and get credentials for that? Is an example of like one of our docs. And I don't see them as that you can't use the static site generation as the thing that's in front of that's actually hosting that wiki though.
Can I interject for a moment? So one, you triggered some thoughts. I mean, this is something that we've had to deal with at Cloud Posse. We obviously have some different requirements, and I don't necessarily think our solution is the right solution for what you're trying to solve. I wish we didn't have to host our docs. I wish we didn't have to deploy CloudFront and S3 and all this stuff to accomplish that. If I could have it my way, we would just use GitHub's ability to natively host private sites. So I first wanted to mention, if you weren't aware of this is the easiest way to go. You get it today. You're not paying for extra users or anything because you're already paying for GitHub. But it requires GitHub Enterprise. I'm not sure if your customer has GitHub Enterprise.
They do not. And yeah, I would have gone down this route if we were on Enterprise, but we've run into the same problem.
So, but you mentioned an interesting thing, and I was thinking, like, you know, well, you need to pick kind of the right tool for the right team. I don't expect the marketing department, I don't expect the sales team to be opening up GitHub pull requests to update relevant docs. It's just not the right tool. Yet Notion, in my opinion, Confluence, and this is a correction, I'm correcting myself here. I still think Confluence is also not the best place for technical documentation either, because you need that stuff versioned alongside of the code that it's describing, right? So we have this problem of multiple systems. For Cloud Posse, we have this thing like we have our tool like Atmos, and we don't want to overload this with a lot of stuff on how we use Atmos. So this documentation site is really about Atmos itself. But then we have our documentation site on how we use our tooling, what are building blocks, and these are aggregated across all these different sites. But what I'm getting to is something that I think you might be able to do relatively easily, going along this theme where the company has silos of documentation and information. The unifying thing for a low-hanging fruit is this, Algolia. So what's really interesting here is I'm on the Cloud Posse site, but I can search for Atmos components or like CLI commands, and I ended up on the Atmos site. So you can imagine that if you just built the indexing part sufficiently for your organization, so you can get all that into your own internal search engine, you can find docs or discover docs across the org.
Yeah, I like that idea. And I think, that's kind of going towards or I think Jim was going in a different direction, but I think that's one of the things that I'm excited about for like the rise of AI is that like, hey, we can have all of our docs and everything kind of have this problem of there's 5 different places to put it. But we have one location that you can search across all of it and it, gets easily found. How have you liked working with Algolia as the means by which to do that? Because I've seen them use it in a very different situation than what you're using it for. And yeah, I'm interested do you think that's the right tool?
You've seen Algolia used in a different way. I see it. I don't know. I guess I'm using the web differently. I see Algolia almost predominantly just for searching documentation, but I guess some e-com sites use them maybe and others. But
I had a client using it for their like big custom CMS, and it was like they were using it instead of a like Elasticsearch basically. It was like a hosted search tool, but it wasn't let me find all these different sources and pull them all together. Yeah.
So one of the nice things about Algolia, they rolled out their Grow plan, which is pretty affordable. We were on some legacy plan, and it was just going up. We were paying like $600-700 a month for search of static documentation that cost me like 75 cents a month to host, run, serve, do whatever. But with the Grow plan, it's down to like 50 or 75 bucks a month.
Nice.
The team seems to like it. It's natively supported by everything out there. It is ubiquitous in that sense. That's why I think it's a good choice.
Okay. That's something I'll definitely look into, at least for like long term. I think we have a path, but yeah.
So I'll give you a complete right turn that no one else has even mentioned here. That I've used in its earlier. No, I'm the opposite of that guy. Yeah, if your code isn't clear enough to be able to just read and understand, Matt, I'm just kidding. Docs, I guess, is one thing, but like wiki and knowledge sharing and specific, like the things that I've seen 10,000 times, but I can never find the answer to, and that kind of thing, is Stack Overflow for Teams. I know it's also expensive. If you're talking, it's probably about the same pricing as the other tool that you mentioned there, but the functionality, I think like almost every developer on earth probably knows how to use Stack Overflow because they've used it so much throughout their career, and they actually have like a really good, like they give you an instance of Stack Overflow for your team. You can put articles in there, which can be all the documentation, and you can also do Q&As that are tagged just the same exact way that regular Stack Overflow is. Finding stuff, in my opinion, is super simple when you search through this. I've used it for only 1.5 companies, I'll say. we were demoing it at one place and then used it like pretty heavily at another, and I was really happy with the outcome. And the barrier to entry, this is the big one for me, and this would be my argument against Eric's thing of like our whole team loves, Algolia. I think we love the search, the UX or DX of Algolia, but like creating new documentation that is then reviewed and stored and eventually like indexed by it is still a giant pain in the ass, where the burden to create knowledge and update knowledge in Stack Overflow is like, whatever, multiples of times less complicated than opening GitHub PRs and Markdown and all sorts of other crazy things. And remembering what repo do we store that in? Where is that in the repo? Which, who needs to review this? Like there's a lot more overhead with the way we do it versus something like Stack Overflow. So
you can
anyway,
start
just
with something
something
like
to look
Stack
at.
Overflow. You can use that to collect the knowledge, to collect the things that you can then ultimately use with ChatGPT to write your. No, I'm joking. That you can ultimately use to inform the documentation that needs to be written. And the barrier to entry is very low, like Matt was saying. I was just going to throw out. I mean, I was so close to signing up for this for a Cloud Posse.
I was encouraging you.
Yeah, but we're just SaaS to death, and I'm just trying to cut costs everywhere I can. And when you get the same ish functionality for free through GitHub now with discussions, it's tightly integrated to the product. Things can be associated with issues and projects. It's not as fancy. It doesn't have some of the eye candy. It doesn't have the document features, but I'm happy with it. I would say our internal adoption could be improved, and there needs to be some rigor to how you use this. But that same rigor would apply to Stack Overflow.
Probably, yeah. I think, I wouldn't exactly classify it as you get the same thing in GitHub knowledge discussions. I mean, that's almost like saying, your whatever your Hyundai, Hyundai Elantra provides the same function that your Ferrari does. Well, yes, it does, but there are also a lot of different different bells and whistles in how it achieves that, like between the two of them. So
I will say I struggle to find conversations and things like that in GitHub discussions.
I do too, all the time. Yeah, and in Stack Overflow, I just feel like somehow, maybe it's just because I've done it for so long, I feel like I can find stuff like a lot easier. Yeah, so
it's a good thing to bring into the mix, because I'll think about that. I think that's not a bad option, even though user cost is it's always just a pain, because
$7 a month for their base plan. But the one thing that I will say is the Stack Overflow for Teams thing also has, so you have your normal questions and answers just like normal Stack Overflow has, but they also have a thing called articles, and articles can actually publish like the documentation, quote unquote, like the static things that you just want to convey that aren't in a question and answer format. So they have the ability to kind of check both of those boxes there. And they have a few other features that aren't in the public product. So take a look, take a look at all the features, and I think they have a free trial. So if you want to kick the tires on it, you can do that.
Good tip.
Yeah, cool.
Can articles be backed up by Git?
What'd you say?
Can those articles be backed by Git? Just curious.
Let's go full circle here.
I don't remember. I don't remember how they do it. I think it's in their own CMS, which I don't think is backed by Git. But they have an API now too, so you can probably figure out a way to get Git-based article, Git-based Markdown as articles if you really want to automate it.
All right, everyone. We didn't get through many questions today, but it was a good conversation. Thanks all for your time. Remember, we're going to be posting this video to our YouTube channel in a few hours. If you haven't already subscribed to our office hours, go to cloudposse.com/officehours. Again, cloudposse.com/officehours. You'll receive an invite to our weekly Zoom session here. Connect with me on LinkedIn by going to linkedin.com/in/Osterman. If you are curious about learning more about Cloud Posse and how we can help move the needle for you at your organization, go to cloudposse.com/quiz. Again, cloudposse.com/quiz. See you all next week, same time, same place. Have a great rest of your week.